The call came in at 11:51 p.m. My mother did not say hello. She simply held up a garment to the camera. It was a white, industrial-grade apron with a massive, comical black bow tie attached to the collar. It looked like something a cartoon character would wear to serve pizza. "We have discussed it with Ashley," my mother said, her voice crisp. "We cannot have you at the main table, Jordan. Not with your current career status. It would be confusing for the guests. Especially Mr. Sterling." I sat in my apartment, the hum of my server rack buzzing softly in the background. I said nothing. I just watched her manicured hands smooth the cheap polyester. "However," she continued, "we know how much you care about Grandma's stay at Green Meadows. If you want us to cover her bill for next month, we think this is a fair trade. You work the bar. You stay invisible. You help your sister shine." She waited for the tears. She wanted the breakdown. But rage didn't burn hot this time. It solidified. It settled in my chest like concrete setting in a foundation. It was no longer a conversation, it was a demolition order. "Fine," I said. "I will be there." I hung up the phone before she could smile. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever been treated like the spare part. I didn't scream into a pillow. I didn't call my best friend to vent about the unfairness of it all. I simply walked into my walk-in closet, the one my mother assumed was empty, and began to pack. She wanted a servant, so I packed the costume. A pair of black slacks, crisp and nondescript. A white button-down shirt, the basic uniform of the invisible. But then I reached for the back of the closet, past the heavy winter coats, to the garment bag I had picked up from the tailor 3 days ago. I unzipped it just an inch, letting the light catch the charcoal silk of the custom jumpsuit inside. It was Italian fabric, tailored to within a millimeter of my life, costing more than the floral arrangements at my sister's wedding. I packed it carefully at the bottom of my duffel bag, beneath a polyester uniform. Next came the real weapon. I opened my wall safe and retrieved my tablet. I didn't need it to serve drinks, but I needed it for what came after. On the screen, the CAD file for Project Skyline was already loaded, a $5.1 billion sustainable development project that was about to redefine the city's waterfront. My family thought I played in the dirt. They saw my work boots and my hard hat and assumed I was a laborer. They didn't know I was the ghost partner at Vanguard Architecture. They didn't know that while they were debating table settings, I was approving steel shipments that weighed more than their entire estate. The zipper sounded like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I took the elevator down to the garage and threw the bag into the passenger seat of my truck. It was a beat-up Ford F-150, covered in dust and scratching from construction sites. My mother hated this truck. She said it looked like poverty. I loved it because it was the only honest thing in our family. It looked rough on the outside because it did real work. As I drove toward Napa Valley, watching the city fade into vineyards, I thought about the transaction I was about to complete. For years, I wondered why they treated me this way. Why was Ashley the golden child for marrying a mid-level executive, while I was the black sheep for building a business from scratch? I used to think they just didn't understand me. But somewhere between mile marker 10 and 11, I realized the truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a structural necessity. Psychologists call it the identified patient or the family scapegoat. In a fragile, insecure family system, one person has to be the failure so the others can feel successful. My parents didn't treat me like a loser because they actually believed it. They treated me like a loser because they needed it. If I was the mess, then their marriage looked stable by comparison. If I was the financial disaster, then my father's dwindling investments felt secure. If I was the ugly duckling, then Ashley could be the swan without even trying. My failure was the load-bearing wall of their self-esteem. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. For 27 years, I had played my part to keep their house standing. I had let them look down on me because I thought it was the price of being in the family. I had even anonymously paid off their second mortgage last year when my father made a bad bet on crypto, just to keep a roof over their heads. But today, the lease was up. They wanted me to wear an apron to hide my shame. What they didn't realize was that by forcing me into the shadows, they were giving me the perfect vantage point to watch the light go out. I pulled up to the security gate of the estate. The guard looked at my truck, then at his clipboard. "Service entrance is around back," he said, barely looking up. "Understood," I said. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the back. They wanted a waiter. I was going to give them the best service of their lives. The Sterling Vineyard Estate was a masterpiece of old money aesthetics, rolling hills, manicured vines, and a main villa that looked like it had been airlifted from Tuscany. I recognized the architecture immediately. It was a mid-century restoration. Listing price probably around $25 million. I parked my dusty truck next to the dumpster around the back. It was fitting. That was where they thought I belonged. The pavement crunched under my boots as I headed toward the kitchen loading dock. Before I could even reach the handle, the heavy steel door swung open. My mother was standing there, blocking the entrance like a bouncer at an exclusive club. She wasn't looking at me. She was scanning the driveway to make sure none of the valet drivers had seen me. "You're late," she hissed, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Guests are already arriving at the north lawn. If Harrison Sterling sees you looking like that before you're in uniform, I will never forgive you." She gestured vaguely at my construction boots. "Good to see you too, Mother," I said, stepping past her into the humid, frantic atmosphere of the catering kitchen. The kitchen was a war zone of chefs shouting orders and waiters polishing silverware. In the center of the chaos stood Ashley. My sister looked undeniably beautiful in a Vera Wang gown that I knew cost more than my first year of college tuition. But the moment she saw me, her face twisted into a sneer that ruined the effect completely. Finally, Ashley said, "She didn't hug me. She didn't say hello. She simply reached into a box on the counter and tossed something at my chest." I caught it. It was a black bow tie, but not a normal bow tie. It was oversized, pre-tied, and made of a shiny, cheap satin that looked like it belonged on a birthday clown. "Put it on," she commanded. "And the apron. We need you at the portable bar in the East Wing. It's separated from the main dining area by the trellis, so you'll be out of the background of the official photos." "Thoughtful," I said, turning the cheap fabric over in my hands. Ashley stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of roasting garlic. She lowered her voice, her eyes narrowing. "Listen to me, Jordan. This isn't just a wedding. It's a networking event for Caleb. Harrison Sterling is going to be here. He is Caleb's boss's boss. He is the most important man in this state." I stifled a laugh. She had no idea. "Do not speak to him," she continued, her voice sharp. "Do not offer him your sustainable building ideas. Do not try to pitch him your little eco projects. If he asks for a drink, you make it, you smile, and you shut up. Do you understand? I cannot have you embarrassing us." I looked at my sister. I looked at the fear in her eyes. She wasn't worried about me embarrassing the family. She was terrified that my existence would crack the porcelain facade she had spent years building. She needed everyone to believe she came from perfect stock, not a family with a failed daughter who worked with her hands. "I understand perfectly," I said. "I'm just the help." "Exactly," she said, turning back to check her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. "Now hurry up. You look ridiculous in those clothes." I walked to the staff locker room, a converted pantry that smelled like bleach. I took off my flannel shirt and construction boots. I pulled on the white button-down and the black slacks. Then I tied the apron. It was stiff and uncomfortable. I clipped on the comical bow tie. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like an architect who managed billion-dollar budgets. I looked like a prop. I looked like exactly what they wanted me to be. A servant. I picked up my tablet and slid it into the hidden kangaroo pocket of the apron, right against my stomach. "Showtime," I whispered to my reflection. I pushed open the swinging doors and walked out to the bar. By 6 o'clock, the reception hall was a deafening roar of crystal clinking against china and forced laughter. 400 of the state's wealthiest people were crammed into the East Wing, and half of them were already drunk on the vintage Cabernet my father had probably mortgaged the guest house to afford. I was stationed behind the satellite bar, a mahogany island in a sea of silk and tuxedos. My mother had placed me here specifically because it was cut off from the main flow of traffic by a heavy trellis of white roses. I was visible enough to be useful, but hidden enough to be ignored. It was the perfect vantage point. Most people crumble when they are forced to serve those who used to be their peers. They feel the humiliation burning in their cheeks. They drop glasses, they mess up orders. Panic is just poor planning. I turned off my emotions and turned on my efficiency. I didn't treat this as servitude. I treated it like a logistics problem on a high-stakes construction site. The bar was my project. The guests were the variables. The drinks were the deliverables. When a venture capitalist in a velvet blazer barked an order for 3 Vespers and a mojito, I didn't flinch at his tone. I executed the order with surgical precision. 2 ounces of gin, 1 ounce of vodka, half an ounce of Lillet Blanc, shake over ice. Strain, twist of lemon. I moved with a rhythm that was almost mechanical. My hands were a blur of motion, pouring, stirring, garnishing, while my face remained a mask of polite indifference. I memorized orders 5 deep. I anticipated spills before they happened, sliding coasters under wet glasses before the condensation could ruin the wood. There is a quiet power in competence. When you are the most capable person in the room, it doesn't matter what you are wearing. You stop being a person and start being a force of nature. I watched the guests stumble and slur, their expensive facades cracking with every drink I served, while I remained sober, sharp, and invisible. "Keep them coming, sweetheart," a man said, sliding a greasy $20 bill across the bar. "You're the only one here who knows what they're doing." I took the bill and dropped it into the tip jar without looking at him. If only he knew that my hourly consulting rate was higher than his monthly mortgage payment. Then I heard a familiar voice drift over the trellis. "It's a done deal, obviously," Caleb said. I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Sterling Corp is acquiring us for the land rights. Harrison and I have been talking about it for months. We're going to level the waterfront. Luxury condos, private marina. It's going to be a gold mine." I paused, a shaker tin suspended in mid-air. Caleb was holding court with a group of his college friends, puffing on a cigar he definitely didn't pay for. He was lying. Or worse, he was delirious. Project Skyline wasn't a luxury condo development. It was a mixed-use sustainable zone. Green roofs, public parks, affordable housing integration, and a net zero carbon footprint. I knew this because I had drawn every single line of the master plan. I had fought the zoning board for 8 months to get the public access clause approved. If Caleb thought Harrison Sterling was buying his company to build a private marina, he hadn't read the contract. Or maybe he just assumed that because he was a man in a suit, the world would bend to his mediocrity. I finished pouring the drink and wiped down the bar top. My hand brushed against the pocket of my apron. Through the stiff fabric, I could feel the hard edge of my tablet. I crouched down, pretending to restock the lemons. In the shadows beneath the bar, I tapped the screen awake. The blue light illuminated the dust on the floor. I pulled up the acquisition strategy file. Paragraph 4, Section B. Current management team to be evaluated for retention based on alignment with sustainability goals. Caleb wasn't just wrong about the project. He was wrong about his future. He was bragging about a merger that was designed to make him obsolete. I stood up, sliding the tablet back into its hiding place. "Another round!" Caleb shouted, raising his glass toward me without making eye contact. Coming right up, I said softly. I mixed his drink with extra care. I wanted him to enjoy it. It was the last taste of victory he was going to have before reality set in. Around 8 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. The band took a break, leaving a vacuum of silence that was quickly filled by the drone of drunken networking. That was when I saw him break away from the pack. Harrison Sterling didn't walk like the other guests. He didn't strut. He moved with the heavy, predatory grace of a man who owned the ground he was walking on. He looked exhausted. He had spent the last 2 hours listening to my brother-in-law pitch him on a fantasy version of a company he had already bought for scraps. Harrison made a beeline for my bar. He wasn't looking for a drink. He was looking for an escape. He leaned his elbows on the mahogany, loosening his tie just an inch. He didn't look at me. To him, I was just a pair of hands in a white shirt. "I don't suppose you have the ingredients for a vieux carré back there?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I need something strong enough to make me forget the last 45 minutes. It was a New Orleans classic. Rye whiskey, cognac, sweet vermouth, Benedictine, and 2 types of bitters. It wasn't on the wedding menu. The wedding menu consisted of blushing bride rosé and groom's lager. "I can make it," I said quietly. I didn't wait for him to respond. I reached for the hidden stash of premium bottles I had moved under the bar earlier, knowing the standard well liquor wouldn't cut it for a palate like his. I worked in silence. The sound of the spoon stirring the ice was rhythmically perfect. I strained the amber liquid into a rocks glass, expressed a lemon peel over the top, and slid it onto a coaster in front of him. Harrison stared at the drink. He took a sip. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "That is," he said, opening his eyes and finally looking at me, "the first honest thing I have experienced all day." He looked at my face. He frowned slightly, as if trying to place a memory that was out of context. "You have good hands. You're overqualified for pouring wine at a wedding. We all have our roles to play, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Just then, my tablet vibrated against my stomach. It was a high priority notification from my structural engineer. I had to check it. If the load-bearing calculations were off for the atrium, we would miss the filing deadline on Monday. I glanced around. Caleb and my mother were busy laughing at the head table, backs turned. I crouched down, pulling the tablet out of the apron pocket. I set it on the lower shelf under the bar, the screen glowing in the dim light. I tapped the notification, bringing up the full 3D render of the Skyline project, the massive glass and steel tower that was the crown jewel of Sterling's new acquisition. "The cantilever needs to be reinforced," I muttered to myself, tapping a note onto the screen. "I'm sorry?" Harrison asked. My voice had slipped out. I froze, looking up. Harrison wasn't looking at me. He was looking over the bar, staring down at the glowing screen on the lower shelf. He was staring at the blueprint. His eyes narrowed. He leaned further over the bar, invading the service space. He recognized the lines. He recognized the logo in the corner. "That's the Skyline render," he said slowly. "That's the confidential elevation for the waterfront project." He looked from the screen to my face. The confusion in his eyes cleared, replaced by a sudden, sharp shock of recognition. He looked at my eyes, not as a servant, but as the person who had sat across from him on Zoom calls for the last 6 months. "Wait," he said. The word came out like a command. "Jordan?" I stood up straight. There was no point in hiding anymore. The apron felt suddenly heavy. "Hello, Harrison," I said. "Jordan?" he repeated, his voice rising, cutting through the ambient chatter of the room. "Jordan, the lead partner? The architect?" He stepped back, looking at my ridiculous bow tie, then back at my face. "Why on earth are you wearing an apron? You're the one designing my headquarters." The glass in his hand clinked against the wood. The sound of his voice carried. At the nearby tables, heads turned. Caleb stopped laughing. My mother froze, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of a carefully constructed lie sucking the oxygen out of the room. The silence was broken by the frantic clicking of heels against the marble floor. My mother and Ashley were rushing toward the bar, their faces masks of panic. They didn't see a successful woman being recognized by a peer. They saw their disobedient servant bothering the VIP. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," my mother gasped, breathless as she reached us. She physically wedged herself between me and Harrison, turning her back to me to block his view. "Please forgive my daughter. She's helping out with the catering today. She knows she isn't supposed to bother the guests." Ashley grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my bicep. "Jordan, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. "Get back to the service well. You are embarrassing us." Harrison looked at my mother, then at Ashley, then at Caleb, who had joined the huddle looking pale and confused. Harrison didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. Then he laughed. It was a single, booming sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Helping out?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. "Mrs. Miller, I think there has been a significant misunderstanding." He gestured to the tablet still glowing on the lower shelf. "This woman isn't the help. She is the lead partner of Vanguard Architecture. She is the creative force behind the $5.1 billion contract I just signed." He turned his gaze to Caleb, who looked like he was about to vomit. "And technically, since the merger includes a full leadership audit, she is effectively your new boss." The words hung in the air, like smoke. Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me, really looked at me, and the color drained from his face as he realized exactly who had been making his drinks for the last 2 hours while he bragged about a marina that would never exist. I looked down at Ashley's hand, still clutching my arm. She followed my gaze and snatched her hand back as if I were burning hot. "I think," I said, my voice calm and steady, "that I am done serving drinks." I reached behind my back. The knot gave way easily. The stiff polyester loosened. I pulled the loop over my head and let the apron drop to the floor. It landed with a soft whomp at my mother's feet, right next to her designer shoes. I unclipped the ridiculous oversized bow tie and dropped it on top of the pile. "Excuse me," I said to the paralyzed group. "I need to change for dinner." I walked past them, head high, heading for the staff restroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but for the first time in my life, the heat didn't hurt. It fueled me. 10 minutes later, I re-entered the ballroom. Gone were the black slacks and the white shirt. I was wearing the charcoal silk jumpsuit. It was sharp, architectural, and undeniably expensive. My hair was down. I walked not to the service entrance, but straight through the center of the room. The conversation stopped as I passed. People who had ignored me or handed me their empty glasses 20 minutes ago were now staring, whispering, Googling my name on their phones. I reached the head table. Harrison Sterling stood up and pulled out the empty chair next to him, the seat of honor. "Miss Miller," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Or should I say, partner?" "Jordan is fine," I said, taking the seat. My mother, who had been standing shell-shocked by the cake table, suddenly seemed to reboot. She hurried over, her face arranging itself into a desperate, trembling smile. "Jordan? Sweetheart." She started reaching out a hand to touch my shoulder. "We had no idea. Why didn't you?" I held up a hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even turn my body fully toward her. "Not now, Mother," I said. "I am seated here as Mr. Sterling's business partner. We have a merger to discuss. If you would like to speak to your daughter, you can call my assistant on Monday and make an appointment." I turned back to Harrison and picked up the glass of champagne he had just poured for me. My mother stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, before finally retreating into the shadows. The rest of the wedding passed in a blur of forced smiles and terrified politeness. Harrison kept me seated next to him for the entire night, effectively shielding me from the family who had tried to hide me. By midnight, the reception hall was emptying out. The magic was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of the cleaning lights coming on. I walked out to the valet stand in the cool night air. My parents were waiting there. They weren't standing with the confident, imperious posture of the morning. They looked small. They looked like people who had just realized they had bet their life savings on the wrong horse. "Jordan," my father started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "We were thinking, maybe you should come by the house tomorrow for brunch? We have so much to catch up on. We want to hear all about the firm." My mother nodded eagerly, clutching her designer purse with white-knuckled fingers. "Yes, we can discuss how to move forward as a family." I looked at them. I waited for the anger to flare up, but it didn't. I didn't feel hate. I felt the kind of detachment you feel when you finally cancel a subscription you haven't used in years. It was just paperwork now. "There won't be a brunch," I said calmly, "and there won't be a discussion." I pulled my phone out. "I have just set up an irrevocable trust for Grandma's care at Green Meadows. Her bills are paid in full for the next 5 years. You won't have to worry about that." Relief washed over their faces. They smiled. They thought I was buying my way back in. They thought the dynamic was restored, that I was still the ATM they could kick when it malfunctioned. However, I continued, my voice dropping a register, precise and lethal. The anonymous payments for the house mortgage stopped. The tuition supplements for Ashley's lifestyle courses canceled. And the emergency fund I've been secretly replenishing every time Dad makes a bad trade, gone. Their smiles evaporated. My mother gasped, a sound like a tire losing air. But she stammered, "Jordan, we're family. You can't just—" "I can," I said. "I am finally treating you like adults who are capable of supporting themselves. You wanted me to be successful? I am. And successful people don't invest in liabilities." Harrison's black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. It wasn't my battered truck. It was a vessel to a different life. I turned to my parents one last time. "I am going to the city to start the Skyline project. Don't call me. I will call you when I am ready," which might be a while. I got into the car. The door shut with a heavy, solid thud, sealing out the cool night air and their desperate expressions. As we drove away, leaving the vineyard and the vineyard's petty hierarchy behind, I looked out the tinted window at the passing darkness. People always talk about success as a way to get revenge, or a way to prove people wrong. But that is too small. That is still living for them. Success doesn't build a wall to keep people out. It builds a gate. You can come in, but only if you knock with respect. If you try to break it down, or sneak in through the back, or demand entry just because we share DNA, you stay outside forever. I wasn't building a wall. I was just, finally, after 27 years, locking the gate. If you are currently building your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share this video. This is your sign to keep building.